Information today is much easier for us to access. In the world of Google, artificial intelligence, smartphones, and the World Wide Web, we can obtain practically anything we want. The question is this: is it accurate or is it not? The lies surround us. This is how you find the truth. The day in which we live is one when we are watching the prominence of one of Satan's greatest tactics on display, right? And that tactic is very simple. That tactic is to get us to a place where we are exposed to so much conflicting information that all information given to us is not just questioned, but is oftentimes minimized, right? And this is a tactic that the enemy has always deployed. This is something that he's always been good at, and this is something that he's always done from the very beginning, right? What he does is he casts dispersion upon the Word of God by not just directly questioning the Word of God or the validity of the Word of God, but he will also cast dispersion upon the Word of God by making directly conflicting statements regarding the truth, and then after doing so, creating within the heart of man confusion regarding the very declarations that are made by making other declarations, right? And this is something that happens a lot, and this is very interesting because we see this sort of dynamic playing out, and we have seen it played out over the years. Perhaps the reason why it's playing out at such a more significant pace, and perhaps the reason why it's so much more grand today, and the reason why it appears to be so much more significant because it is because the avenues or the platforms for information that mankind has available to itself have increased substantially, right? Even when you look at the time when I first started teaching the Bible. When I first started teaching the Bible 30 years ago, yes, folks, 30 years ago, actually just over 30 years ago, think about this. The type of tools that were available to us at that time were not even close to the type of tools that we have available to us today, right? There was no such thing as the internet. At least it was available at a very limited capacity. The internet to most people was this thing called AOL, right? For those of you that might remember, it was called America Online. And you actually had these little dial-up tools that you would dial into whatever server it is that you were getting into. And if you had super fast internet, okay, now ready, I'm going to date myself here substantially. If you had super fast internet during that time, you had a 2400 baud modem. You know what I'm talking about when I say that? So just to give you kids an idea of the speed of a 2400 baud modem, if I were to download a picture, which is the average size of a picture being taken right now by your iPhone, let's just figure roughly about 4 megabytes in size, anywhere from 4 to 8 to 12 megabytes, depending on the type of picture you snap on your phone. Right now, we can text those pictures to one another. But if I were to download a photo that was, let's just say this, let's just get really fancy here. Let's say 12 megabytes under that speed. That would literally be almost an hour to download. No joke. That's how slow internet was. And quite frankly, what internet was typically relegated to was a bunch of transfer of text information, right? You would go, you would log in, you would see helpful pieces of text. Bulletin board systems were the things that were really popular at the time. They were useful. Google didn't exist. It wasn't around. There was no such thing as searching on the internet for any type of data or help. YouTube was something that was, no one had even heard what it was. As a matter of fact, when YouTube was created, men like me would say that that was a fad, right? And then, of course, it took about a month for me to figure out it wasn't a fad, and it was turning into something that was a whole lot more significant than anybody thought. And no one ever foresaw, nobody could have foreseen just how intricate the internet would become to so many people. Because the reality of it is, if you wanted information when I was a kid, right, when I was in Bible college, if you wanted information, you didn't go online to get that information. If you wanted information, you either spent a whole lot of money and invested with one of those traveling salesmen, something like, I think it was like a total of $15 $1,500 or $1,800 for your own set of Britannica encyclopedias or whatever company it was that was selling. You either had to buy those and then you'd have them in your library, or what you would do is you would go to the library that had several different sets of encyclopedias, and those encyclopedias were specifically designed by their makers to be able to open them up completely wide so that you can take them and stick them on a photocopy machine and photocopy whatever pages you want, and then you would take those pages home and then you would read from those pages or do whatever work that you did. And if you wanted to make a photocopy of those pages, it was roughly 25 cents per copy, and 25 cents per copy was remarkably expensive during that time. And this is how information was handed back and forth. And it was not a process that was very easy, and it was not a process that was very convenient. And if I wanted to take information with me, there was no such thing as a thumb drive. There was no such thing as upload it to your own personal storage space. There was no cloud. There was nothing like that. Even in the digital age, as it was really beginning to start, you had to walk around with the 5.25-inch floppy disk, right? Or sometimes if you really got fancy and you had some extra money, you could buy that different type of drive, you'd walk around with a 3-inch floppy disk, right? And then pretty soon, those began to be a thing of the past. I remember the very first time I saw that computer manufacturers were no longer selling computers that had floppy disks in them. I thought, this is inconceivable. That won't work. Nobody will ever buy their computer because it doesn't have a floppy disk drive. That's ridiculous. And then I remember when they started saying, we're going to stop selling computers that have CD-ROM drives in them, right? Some of you don't even know what a CD-ROM drive is. Some of you younger people, you don't even know what that is, because most people just understand that if you're going to buy a piece of software, you download it or it comes to you on a thumb drive. And even then, most people don't even use thumb drives. Why? Because the world in which we live has changed so substantially. Think about this for just a moment, folks. During World War II, if you wanted to get information regarding a specific battle that had taken place during that time, it would take you as long as a month to obtain that information, sometimes longer, because that's how long it would take to safely get those photographs back. Remember, they had to be personally flown back. It took that kind of time to be able to accurately assess or sort of write down what was going on. And if you were taking these limited quality type videos from that era, those were remarkably difficult to be able to transport, right? Now, we live in a completely different world. Now, it doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter what war is taking place. It doesn't matter where in the world it's going on. You can actually see that footage literally seconds after it happens, or in many cases you can actually see live broadcasts of footage like that that's going on. And if you don't believe me, just simply get on any of your favorite social media channels and just type in something like Ukraine very quickly, and you'll start seeing all kinds of live broadcasts of airplanes in the air flying over, missiles getting shot out, all kinds of things. It's happening, and it's happening faster than we can think. There's the other thing I think about. Everybody's been talking about Apollo 11 as of late, right? Over the last few months, people have been having a lot of conversation about that because, again, people still, to a degree, honor anniversaries and look at certain milestones. And so there's been a lot of discussion about Apollo 11. And if you're a space nerd like me, then you'll know all about these missions and you'll understand the significance of every single one of them. And you want to know something that's really interesting? If you stop for one moment to consider every bit of computing power that was available, think about this for a second. Every bit of computing power that was available to NASA at the time that those men landed on the moon. The average Apple Watch that's out there has more computing power. That's no joke. My whole point behind it is technology has so dramatically and radically changed. So much has changed that the transmission of information has gone up so substantially that the devil has become really good at getting man to do a couple of things. Here's the first thing he's been really good at doing. He's gotten really good at getting man to ignore all information that comes their way because so much of it comes. Everything is so discombobulated. I heard President Obama at one point actually talk about a method that he thinks is a viable method for gathering people together. This is before he was the president, and he was actually just an organizer in Chicago. He was talking about the importance, and he actually said this recently again after being a president. He got up and he talked about the importance of flooding your audience with so much information that's conflicting, right? Antithetically opposed information to one another, that they are confused to the point that they don't know what's true.
Understand, it's not necessary for people to believe this information in order to weaken democratic institutions. You just have to flood a country's public square with enough raw sewage. You just have to raise enough questions, spread enough dirt, plant enough conspiracy theorizing that citizens no longer know what to believe. Once they lose trust in their leaders, in mainstream media, in political institutions, in each other, in the possibility of truth, the game's won.
And it's a great way of getting them out of their bearing. And people will listen to him say that and go, that just sounds really crazy. And, the average educated person that understands where that terminology is coming from will say, well, that's Saul Alinsky. Or some people will say, well, that came from earlier Marxist ideas and beliefs. And my view on that is it dates way before that time. It comes from Satan. Right? It's a satanic idea. It's a satanic thought. And the problem that we have as believers is oftentimes we have allowed ourselves to buy into those lies. We've allowed ourselves to think that the things that are being communicated to us are just regular and acceptable because they've been made acceptable in society when God has been telling us through and through, no, this is coming. This is what the fact is. No matter how muddied the waters feel, you have a book right here that gives you every piece of information that you could ever need to be able to know exactly what the truth is, to know where the right bearing is, to understand the difference between right and wrong. And you've been given every tool. Literally, God has given you every tool necessary to be able to find your bearing in any circumstance or in any situation. No matter how confusing things seem, no matter how difficult things seem, no matter how hard things might be, it doesn't matter what the circumstance is. God has given you everything that you need in his word to be able to understand and know what's going on. Now, here's where it becomes kind of crazy. And here's where it becomes outrageous. When you understand all of these things, it would appear as though the clearer God gets concerning the warnings that he voices, the more muddied it becomes in the mind and in the heart of man. Now, there are two great contributory variables that exist that create this dynamic. The first one is, if you're not born again, you're not going to understand the things that God says oftentimes, and oftentimes, because you're walking in that sort of dead state, you're not going to recognize it, right? The second thing is, and this one is perhaps the one that we see so much more often and that we see so much on a regular basis, is that when these things come forth and God speaks concerning these things, we mistake what we perceive as God delaying action with it actually never happening or not being real. Oh, they've been saying that's going to happen for years. Oh, they've been warning us that things like this are going to happen forever. You're just an alarmist. You're just saying things that you know for a fact are going to cause panic in people. So why in the world would you say them? Can I remind everybody of something very important? It is a very important variable. And this is not me, sort of seeking to dime out anybody or put anybody on notice, because everybody knows who they are in this. And quite frankly, everybody for the most part in this church that came up to me to talk to me about this actually meant well. Now they understand the reality of everything that has been manifesting. Let me remind everybody that 3 years ago, 4 years ago, so many people, especially at the beginning of this nonsense with COVID, so many people in this church, as a matter of fact, many of which have left the church over it, came to me and said, stop talking about all of this stuff. Stop talking about end time stuff. Stop warning everybody about what's happening. Stop speaking about politics. Don't talk about any of these things. All of this stuff has been happening in cycles for years and years and years and years, and nothing has changed under the sun. It's all the same. And my statement to them every single time was, you're going to hear it. I'm not backing down. This is something that is happening right in front of our faces. It's materializing, and you will eventually see it. Now, it's your choice whether or not you want to stick around and actually watch it being manifested. But the one thing you will never be able to accuse me of is being somebody that did not prepare you for the time and the day in which we live. And the reality of it is, I have a lot of people that still to this day regularly come back to me and say, I have no idea how you saw it. I had no idea how you had the foresight to understand what would happen. But it's almost like you hit the fast forward button. Somebody planted you in the future 3 to 4, 5 years from now, and you saw it all coming, because everything you warned us about is actually happening right now. Everything you told us would happen is actually happening right now. I heard guys on the radio. There were guys on the radio that made whole dissertations about me, specifically saying that I am out of touch with reality, that I am settling panic in people's hearts, that what I'm saying doesn't even make sense because it's not even biblically based. It would be really, really funny to hear those guys eat their words today, right? To recognize that it's all coming about. Why? Because understand this, folks. This has been a tactic of the enemy from the very beginning. It's always been a yeah. It's been going on for years. That's why Jesus warned us in Matthew chapter 24 about the last days being as the days of Noah. What are the days of Noah? Remember, they saw this massive ark being built, right? 75 years it took Noah to build this ark at the bare minimum. Can you imagine how people were feeling generation after generation, watching what they perceived to be a crazy old man building an ark? And every single time they look at the ark, what was it a symbol of? It was not a symbol of Noah's insanity. Folks, every time they look at that ark, it didn't remind them of how crazy Noah was. You know what it reminded them of? It reminded them of a warning that was being voiced on a regular basis, that God's judgment was impending, that the judgment of God was coming. And every single time people woke up and they saw the symbol, the sign of God's judgment, you know what they did? They ate, they drank, they married, they lived their life like nothing was going to happen. They said, no big deal. Nothing is going to happen. It's not anything they've been talking about this for thousands of years. They've been talking about this for hundreds of years. In the case of Noah, man, Noah's been at this for 75 years and nothing has happened. This is crazy. Let's just go on living our lives. They probably called him a conspiracy theorist. They probably called him a nut. They probably called him all kinds of crazy things. Get this, Noah was undoubtedly a conspiracy theorist. And then guess what happened? Then it started raining. And then when the floods came up and people started drowning because they couldn't get into that ark, they began to realize that whether or not Noah was a conspiracy theorist, his conspiracy theory was actually truth. And he recognized it because God spoke to him and God warned him. And it's so interesting when that happens. You know, I'm at the point now in my life where I'm so grateful when I get called a conspiracy theorist, because oftentimes getting called a conspiracy theorist just simply means that I had enough vision to be able to see and understand and know and discern what was actually truthful and what was actually happening. And so the reality of it was, when the floods came, when the rain came down and the floods began to come up, when they began to rise, people began to see what was going on. And Jesus warned them. Jesus said, he warned us. He said that the last days will be as the days of Noah, that as they begin to see the symbol of God's judgment, that they would ignore it and eat and drink and be merry and just live according to however they were living in the past. Here's the funny thing that a lot of guys don't preach about. Here's the funny thing that a lot of men don't talk about oftentimes, and that's going back to the symbol of judgment in the ark of Noah. When you look at Noah's ark, you see that as a symbol of judgment. The people that were living during that time undoubtedly saw that as a symbol of God's coming judgment. But did you know the righteous, which by the way was a very small contingency, a very small crowd, quite frankly, it was one family. To the rest of the world, when they saw that ark, it was a symbol of judgment. When Noah's people saw that ark, it was a symbol of God's grace. It was a symbol of God's mercy. It was a symbol of God's rescuing hand. Why? Because every time they were looking at that ark, every single time they put some kind of a fastener into that ark, every single time they built a portion of that ark, they were recognizing that what they were building was going to become their salvation. What they were building was going to keep them from a sure death. What they were building was going to save every generation to come. What they were building was going to be used for the purpose of literally preserving mankind. They knew it. So what was a symbol of judgment to the world that did not know God was a symbol of the mercy and grace of God to those that actually knew him.